All right, everyone. Dreamhost has come out and said, oh, yeah, Sessions DOJ wants like 1.3 million users' data for sort of an anti-Trump website there. I guess the idea is that mixed in with those users, there might be like AntiVa members, people who are being paid by foreign states to provoke or something like that. And so I've got mixed feelings here because I believe strongly in the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable, regardless of, any scumbags that are mixed in with that total. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with the DOJ collecting that much personal info on that many people. They're talking about, well, anybody who's visited this anti-Trump site, we're going to look through this. So what about people who actually support Trump and they went there specifically because they saw it spoken of? They're getting their personal data taken up. Are they going to be subjected to some sort of surveillance, even though they have absolutely nothing to do with the function of the site as organizing protests or riots or whatever? Now, if you want to focus on Antifa, there are probably other ways to go about that other than, just go after Dreamhost for this Antifa-linked website or something. I have no problem with making sure that there's data kept on terroristic or criminal elements within the country. Antifa has already been declared a terrorist organization in the state of New Jersey. At the very least, any function there, yeah, they're probably conducting surveillance on them. I label them a criminal syndicate, not really a terrorist group. The same is true, I know Illinois now is trying to declare in a general blanket term, white supremacy is a terrorist movement. Now, I don't know that that's going to hold up to judicial scrutiny. Think what you will about some of those groups. You're going to have, I think, more specific terms. Because otherwise, anyone who shows up at the protest, even though they don't have anything in common with them necessarily, might get swept up. And it's the same thing as this Dreamhost crap. Do you want the DOJ to come in with a warrant and start going through people's personal info who have nothing to do with actually the subject at hand? I don't know that that's a great idea. Also, the DOJ should show restraint because, again, as always, perception over reality. The reality might be, we're legitimately concerned that some group of people's organizing literal riots here. There will be violence. Okay, yeah, that's fine. What the average person sees when they see this story, though, has nothing to do with that. What they see is, Trump wants the personal info of his critics, or something like that. That could become a problem, a much bigger problem, by the way, than the actual core issue of maybe going through and only really collecting anything on those that, on the surface, appear to be engaged in violence. It could become a problem for the administration, I would say to Jeff Sessions. I know he's not necessarily the wisest person who's ever lived, maybe on the drug war and a million other issues, but if you show restraint, things will generally work out better. And plus, keep in mind, right now the online world is a free-for-all. You've got people who are like Nazis and communists. They're fighting each other in the streets, but they're also fighting each other online. They're constantly trying to attack one another's presences. The situation basically, in essence, solves itself as long as the government takes a hands-off approach. Hell, private citizens that simply organize online are better at conducting that kind of data grab than the government, apparently. They have to drag their ass through the legal system. Some group of vigilantes online probably doesn't really care about that sort of stuff. If you have a problem with Antifa, that's fine. I do too. Again, support their right to speak freely, not their right to throw rocks and torches at people and stuff like that. Same goes for the Nazis. But gathering all of their data is going to be hard when it's so expansive. You're talking about over 1 million people here. If you're gathering data on them all, I would think that breaches the Fourth Amendment, quite clearly. Regardless of the pragmatism of getting a few, criminals or something like that, that's fine. There are probably other ways to go about that, as opposed to simply looking through everyone's material to find out if they're loyal. And it's the same thing when the tech firms engage in such nonsensical behavior, like when Google does with its censorship. That's the line I use. I'm uncomfortable with that. I think it's a breach of people's privacy, people's right to free expression. It also doesn't look bad for the company, or in this case for the DOJ. It doesn't look good for them. It's not a good look to be engaged in mass surveillance and censorship. Most people react negatively to these things. So if you're trying to actually go after Antifa, that's not the way to do it. What they will do now is say, evil fascist Trump is targeting us, trying to dox us or something like that, and we must resist him. And they'll use that. All the anti-censorship, like left-leaning libertarians, will be receptive to that message. You may not like that to be the case, but it will be. You're talking about probably at least a six-figure sum of people that are receptive to that basic marketing strategy that has been formulated because of the overstepping of the DOJ. And I'm sure, over the coming months, I'm sure I'm going to be consistently talking about the same basic concept, which is simply maneuvering and strategy and marketing and things of that nature. Because when the government gets involved, it typically does stupid stuff. The government's not very good at suppressing movements, unless it intends to kill every member or something like that, and of course that's happened in the past too. Trying to suppress people ideologically isn't the greatest idea. It doesn't really work. It won't work on the Nazis, it won't work on the communists, it won't work on some dedicated anarchist movement, it won't work on an identitarian movement, it just won't. Because these people then, they gain ideological leverage. So the government should back off. No, I don't think this is a good idea necessarily. If it were more targeted, if you were saying, hey, some people on this site are probably engaged in criminal behavior, we want, maybe local law enforcement to take a look through and get a much more limited warrant. But when you're talking about 1.3, you actually think there are over 1 million people in the country that have dedicated themselves to, we're going to cause riots and throw rocks and stuff. Well, that's funny. I don't see that many people on the street doing that. I'm skeptical as to whether all of those IP addresses are actually associated with people that are committing some sort of crime. And I saw, like, the other day, the Antifa flag was raised in some town square or something. The county flag was replaced with an Antifa flag. Can't remember the township. And some people had a big problem with this. They were comparing it to, like, the statue in, I think it was Durham being toppled. That's running a flag up a pole. That's not the same thing. Yeah, maybe it's kind of vandalism, but nobody was hurt in the process. Really, action's more important than expression or words. If somebody's just marching down the street being offensive, I don't care. If somebody has pulled some sort of prank, like replacing a flag with here the Antifa flag, it'd be the same if it was like the Gadsden flag or something. Who cares, the flag? You can reverse that fairly easily. Nobody was apparently harmed. Who cares? To try to... you can't just crack down on fringe movements. It won't work. Even if you think it would be wonderful if it did, it just won't. And so since it won't work, don't even bother trying. Let the grassroots population of the United States do what it does best. Have a national dialogue. It's a lot easier now with the internet than it was. We had to listen to some boring pundit on TV 20 years ago. People can have that debate. Do you think that the average American is going to become a communist or a Nazi? No. But they might, unfortunately, in large numbers, if the government keeps making mistakes, if tech firms keep getting involved, and if these groups, because of uneven suppression, continue to grandstand and market themselves off as the other guys are scarier, join us and we'll help protect you. It's a death spiral. It's the worst possible scenario. Now, they were also posting, I saw this last night, some statistics on polling. And of course, polls are not necessarily the most trustworthy thing in the world, but I think in this case, it does at least make sense. It fits what we see in society. That people's opinion on race relations right now is at its worst point since the dawn of the 1990s. We're thinking of, like, wasn't that the Rodney King era or something like the LA riots? Yeah, I would think we've got a little bit of a national problem right now. And the way forward is pro-liberty. The way forward, you can temporarily take care of that if you suppress some group. It won't be lasting, though. We tried that in the 90s. And the specter of bad race relations, has it not come back right now in full force? It's just as bad as it was then. We bought ourselves time in the feel-good days of the nifty 90s. people were less concerned because the economy was surging ahead and the USSR fell, and, you know, we could listen to good rock music on the radio. Nobody really cared. They were too busy watching Beavis and Butthead. But we're in the post-recession, post-9/11 era now. Things are a little bit different, unfortunately. They're more stressed in general. That causes other things to happen. And the worst thing you can have is that you have actual violent Nazis and actual violent communists. Again, not LARPers, not people who are being ironic, not shit posters, not people who merely want to be offensive. And some people on the communistic side do this. They spout off about Stalin to bother people. There are people who kind of sort of are identitarian, but not really, and they LARP about Hitler. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about actual militant organizations. Literal skinheads, literal red shirts, something like that. They will proliferate because they're going to talk to people that are kind of on the fringes of their movements. First, they'll go after people who have some loose ideological overlap with their views. They'll do this both in the real public square and online. They'll say, these other people are out to get you, they want to destroy the country, they want to destroy freedom, and they want to abuse you. You have to stand with us because we're the ones willing to get into a dust-up and will defend you. They'll start absorbing those groups. They'll grow larger. Once they've gotten larger, violence will increase. Then they'll start gobbling up people who simply are more averse to the other side. That is, they don't have any real ideological overlap. They're not a Nazi, they're not a communist, they have nothing really in common with them. But they become deluded. Their cognitive dissonance kicks in because a false dichotomy has been constructed. They look over, see the other guys being violent. They ignore the violence. It is perpetuated by both sides, honestly. And then they themselves potentially get involved in violence. It would be a death spiral for this country. Now, we can hope that this will be more like the early 90s. And this was brought up by some, I think Business Insider posted about it. We can hope that this is more like the early 90s and passes in a few years. Or it's because of economic reasons primarily, or technology. We can hope that. Or we can hope that it's like, you know, the 60s with Vietnam War, and that things are just generally in chaos at some point. They will calm back down because of political movement. Okay, we can hope for that. But we shouldn't be planning for that. We should be planning for the worst. We should be planning for these two dipoles, so-called, because they're both abusive, both violent potentially. We should be planning for them to proliferate and continue assaulting one another and start putting their argument forth, hey, people who are sitting on the fence need to join us. And I need to make a video about the fact that I won't be joining anybody. No, I don't care. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not a communist. I'm not joining these movements. It's not going to happen. I'll create my own movement. It'll have me, myself, and I in it, and I'll call it Stixism. And others can come along if they like liberty, and I don't know, maybe we'll get together and wave the U.S. flag and sing Hail Columbia or something like that. That sounds like a bit of a better future. Yeah, it sounds better than Weimar Germany or something like that. Let's go back to building Art Deco skyscrapers or something. Let's just have Americana. Sounds better. But yeah, I'm not so sure. I'm not 100% sure it's appropriate for the DOJ to head on after over 1 million people's user data. Especially, again, a lot of these people probably visited this site and maybe even posted stuff there because they oppose it. They actually were trying to stir up, like they were raiding the site, but now their IP's on that list somewhere, and they're getting looked into. That's a little bit too, I'm sorry, that's a little bit too expansive. It's a false solution for a problem that as of right now is still relatively limited. You're talking about the militant left. There aren't millions of militant leftists in this country. There are plenty of social justice warriors that ramble on about being offended and stuff. But mostly they don't throw Molotov cocktails. They don't go to riots, and some of them are like, they're like, oh, you ableist, you know, shitlord, or something, so they can't even participate in a riot. Or something like that. They'd have to carry the rocks and Molotov cocktails in the back of their electric scooter or something like that. So, you know, worried as you may be about these two groups, the government getting involved makes the situation worse. It's like rubbing salt in a wound or rubbing your acne with a wool sponge or something like that. It's just not going to work. It's not going to help anybody. It needs to be a grassroots response. That's about all. Peace out.